You're in the show.
Shavua Tov, everybody. And I guess, unlike when Shabbat came in, we were a few minutes delayed. We are on time. And people ask me, actually, why did we wait till 9 o'clock? Shabbat went out at 8:27. We could have done this earlier. And there was a few reasons. The first, of course, is that people were doing their own Havdalah ceremonies in their communities. So we wanted to give people a chance to do that as well. But more importantly, this is a UK community Shabbat. And we wanted to wait for the whole of the UK to finish Shabbat. And in Glasgow, our most northernmost community doing the project, it was 8:57 when Shabbat went out. So now they also have Shabbat, it's out, and therefore they can participate in the Havdalah ceremony. And what an amazing Shabbat it's been. I've only obviously been in my house with my family, but just, this afternoon, we opened our door to get some fresh air, people walking by, and just saying, and we read this, we love Rabbi Lord's story, and it's amazing to think that we were doing things on Shabbat in our isolated families, and yet everyone across the country was reading and doing the same thing. Obviously, different answers to the questions, different things that people liked and didn't like in terms of what it created. But I think it created across the country a sense of togetherness, of unity, that everyone knew. When you were reading your questions or doing your quizzes or whatever it was, you were doing something united you as a community across the nation. And all 67 communities, and there's 9 cities, I think hopefully everyone felt this sense of togetherness. And really, when I think about when I was in this, we were together 25 hours ago, or 26 hours ago, actually, as Shabbat came in, we're now hopefully together again, 26 hours later, as our families, watching Havdalah, and they're going to have now a very special experience. And we're going to start with a message from a hero of mine. We spoke about living modern Jewish heroes in our Shabbaton, and now we're going to meet one for me who's a living Jewish hero, very much was one who inspired me to go into the rabbin all those years ago. He was our former chief rabbi, now very much a visionary voice for the world, somebody who is heard by thousands weekly on his various broadcasts and various podcasts and various shiurim. Gives me a pleasure to share some words. I think he's made Havdalah already at home, to share some post-Havdalah words before we go on to Jonny Turgel. It's Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks.
It's my task, as it were, to say the Shavua Tov, to talk just a little bit about the spiritual significance of Havdalah at this unusual, unique time. And of course, Havdalah consists really of 3 basic elements other than the Havdalah blessing itself. And let's mention them one by one and explain their significance today. Number 1, of course, is the Havdalah candle, the light. And there's an extraordinary significance to this light. The rabbi said the following, that Adam and Eve were created on day 6 of creation, on Friday. They sinned, they were sentenced to exile from the Garden of Eden, but God had compassion on them and let them stay in Eden for 1 day for Shabbat. And after Shabbat, they had to leave. And of course, when Motzi Shabbat came, the 2 of them were bereft, they were terrified. They were about to leave paradise and go out into a dark and dangerous world. And that was when God taught them to make light, so that their first day in the world would be like God's first day a week earlier. God began by saying, let there be light, and we begin our week by saying, let there be light. So the light is there to give us confidence and courage in a dark world, a dangerous one. And that's why it's gained incredibly added significance during this coronavirus pandemic. That is our light, and through it we can see the way through the dark. Second, of course, is the besamim, the spices. And the rabbi said the spices are there to revive our flagging spirits. And we need them now. Hashem made sure we would have things that would lift our spirits when we felt ourselves anxious, fearful, on the brink of despair. And that's what the besamim are. They have comforted Jews and revived their spirits for 100, maybe 200 generations. And let them do so now. And then finally there's the wine, which actually begins the Havdalah service, the Borei Pri Hagafen. The reason we use wine is because there's a law that we celebrate the beginning of Shabbat and the end of Shabbat with a blessing over wine. Kiddush at the beginning, Havdalah at the end. Now, if you think about it, to celebrate the arrival of Shabbat makes obvious sense. It's a wonderful day. It's our little return to paradise. But why celebrate the departure of Shabbat? On the contrary, we should be sad. But the reason we're able to celebrate the end of Shabbat is because God promised at the beginning of time that no, not every day is Shabbat. Nonetheless, in a week's time, Shabbat will come back. Because we're not losing something, we are saying a temporary farewell to something we know we will regain. We're able to say a blessing over wine at Havdalah as well. So although we've had many years of what I would call Shabbos time, of peace, of prosperity, of all sorts of good things, and now for the world we've entered a period of Motzi Shabbat, when all the things we had so enjoyed are not there anymore, and when we are so isolated. Nonetheless, we can still say a blessing over wine, and at the Seder service over 4 cups of wine, because we know the good times will return. Hashem will not leave us or forsake us. And this will end. The psychological, the physical, the economic pain will end one day, and we will be there to see it end. So, Shavua Tov, may it be a Shabbat Hagadol for all of you, a great Shabbat, because, oddly enough, for the first time perhaps ever, all the Jews of the world are united electronically because they couldn't be united physically. So this really is a great Shabbat, and may it lead into a great Pesach, and may Pesach itself lead to the redemption we and the world so badly need. Shavua Tov.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Sacks. Wise words as ever. And just as we began Shabbat, this whole experience of the UK Shabbaton at home, we began it with music, obviously from Yaakov Shweki. We're going to end this experience, end this Shabbaton, with the music of somebody who I knew him first as a youth in my youth service at Stanwell Synagogue, then as the Chazan of my shul, along with Rabbi Cohen and Rabbi Lou of Stanwell Synagogue, and now, of course, my dear friend, someone who I go around the world with as we perform Kings of a Nation and Yom HaShoah and things like that. So without further ado, to take us out of Shabbat with a beautiful Havdalah service, the one and only Chazan Jonny Turgel.
Shavua Tov, thank you so much, Rabbi Shul. Thank you, everyone, for joining. For those who don't know, I'm Jonny Turgel, Chazan of Stanwell Shul. Please join in with this special Havdalah from home. Hinei el Yeshuati, eftach velo efchad, ki hazi bezimrat Adonai, vayei Yeshua, ושאבתם מים בששון, ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני הישועה, אבל עמך, וירחתך סלע, אדוני צבאות יבנו, משכב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלע, אדוני צבאות אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני הושיע מלך יעננו ויום קוראנו, ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה kos yeshuot esa u'b'shem Adonai yekra. Everyone together. La 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 la. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. La 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 la. Korech b'ri hagafen. La 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. La 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 la. Korech minei. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh oh oh. La 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 la. La 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. La 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 la. Korech me'orei ha'esh. La 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 Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Amavdil ben Kodesh lechol ben lechoshev ben Yisrael ve'Elohim ben Yom HaShevi le'Sheshet Yemei HaMaseh. Baruch atah Adonai. La 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 la. Mavdil ben Kodesh lechol. Wow, what an incredible Shabbat we've had. Thousands of people from over 65, 70 communities here in the UK sharing this Shabbat Hagadol together. Just imagine the simcha when we're all back in our shuls together. Or even better, when this ends and we are all united in Yerushalayim, Kadesh, once more. Let's sing together one last song. Emunah Shalema. Someday we will all be together. Someday we'll be sheltered and warm. Never will we have to express any fear. Our scars and our wounds will disappear. Abraham and Yitzchak will be there to greet us. Yaakov and his sons will stand by and smile. Moshe Rabbeinu will greet us once again in Yerushalayim Bezrat Hashem. We learn every day and we daven We ask Hashem, please bring those old times back. We all know that you're listening. Of course we know it's true. For I've received the promise, and so have you. That Hashem will lead us out of this galut. We can't take too much longer, you know why. And then together we're all gonna daven. Together we're all gonna sing. We're gonna praise and thank you, Hashem, for everything. Come on, everyone, let's go. Someday we will all be together. Someday we'll be sheltered and warm. Never will we have to express any fear. Our scars and our wounds will disappear. One day, Abraham and Yitzchak will be there to greet us. Yaakov and his sons will stand by and smile. Moshe Rabbeinu will greet us once again. All together now in Yerushalayim. Come on, everyone at home, you can do it better than that. In Yerushalayim. Be'ezrat Hashem. Someday we'll all be together. Wow. Thank you so much once again, everybody, for joining us. I'd now like to hand over back to Rabbi Shaw.
Johnny, thank you so much. What I can say is that's our finale song from Dreams of a Nation. So please go. Someday we're back on the road again. I know we've got to bring it to Edgware's the next on our list, and then we had Pin and all these shuls. So please, God, we can do that again someday soon. So
Amen.
Thank you, beautiful voice, your beautiful heart. Love to the family. We'll speak soon. Shkoyach. So all that remains now for me to do is to say thank you. Thank you, I guess, to all of you around the country. I think we've got another 2,000 people tuned in now for Havdalah. So thank you for being part of this first ever UK community Shabbaton at home. But really, the thank you has to be to the people who put this together. A huge thank you to Rabbi Michael Leitner of Kinloss and of the Young United States Jewish Living Department, dear friend, and again, help with putting all the deals together. Rabbi Daniel Fines from Stanmore, my old shul. Together, we dreamed up this idea to take this further, take this idea to the whole of the UK. David Rubin of Mizrahi, the programs director, put all the programs together, all the books together, all the pamphlets, all the shuls, unbelievable. Didn't sleep for like 3 or 4 nights. To Richard Verber, who basically put all this together with the wonderful IT staff and all his help with the PR to the country. And finally to Gemma Denby, who basically made sure she called all the shuls to make sure they knew what was happening, kept up to date. It was an amazing team effort, both from Mizrahi and from our partners, United Synagogue. And I guess we want people to still comment. Please tweet at United Synagogue, at Mizrahi. Let us know your experiences. I'm already seeing on some of my things, people's ideas, people's memories. It's brilliant. We want to capture it. Send photos in, obviously, from Havdalah, from pre-Shabbat. And really, it's just amazing that everyone's come together. And this is not the only thing we'll be doing. Please, God, up in the next few weeks and months, there'll be more stuff coming from Mizrahi and United Synagogue, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaTzmaut, so many things happening. So please do stay in touch. We'll let you know what's happening. And all that remains for me to say is we're going to finish after this with a shiur from Rabbi Daniel Roselaar to make sure we end Shabbat Hagadol move into the week of Pesach with Divrei Torah, with the Shabbat Hagadol shiur, which is halachic insights into the 15 stages of the Seder from Rabbi Roselaar. We used to be colleagues in Stamford and Belmont. We now still are colleagues. We daven mincha together in his shul. When, please God, once again, we'll do that soon at mincha time in Eretz Zion. So I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Tov, and to hand you over now to Rabbi Roselaar for the shiur. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this incredible Shabbaton. And please, God, have a Chag Sameach and a happy and healthy Seder for the entire world. Bye-bye.
Shavua Tov. Thank you so much, Rabbi Shaw, not just for your words of conclusion now, but really for putting together this wonderful Shabbaton, which so many people enjoyed. I'm sure so many people were inspired by it. And really, kol hakavod to you and your whole team. And Chazan Jonny Turgel for a wonderful Havdalah there, a really tremendous way to finish a very, very special Shabbat. And Johnny, we wish you and your family Shavua Tov and Chag Kasher Sameach, and also to Rabbi Shaw, his team at Mizrahi, Rabbi Leitner, Rabbi Fine, and their team at the United Synagogue, Shavua Tov and Chag Kasher Sameach. There is a long-standing tradition that on Shabbat Hagadol there is an in-depth shiur about the halachot of Pesach, which is coming up, in order to prepare people and so that people can be properly readied for the upcoming festival. Unfortunately, this year we didn't have the opportunity to give our shiurim over the course of Shabbat, but we have this opportunity this evening to learn together somewhat and to prepare ourselves halachically and religiously for the upcoming Seder nights, which will be on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. That's what I want to do this evening, is to go through the 15 stages of the Seder and look at one or two halachic considerations about each of those stages of the Seder. It's not going to be exhaustive. It might be exhausting, but it won't be exhaustive. And hopefully give people a little bit of food for thought as they approach the Leil HaSeder and as they're planning as to how they're going to lead the Seder service this year. There is a source sheet available. That's www.theus.org.uk/source sheet. It's quite extensive. We won't be going through all of it together this evening, but it's there as a learning resource for people who want to use it. The bulk of the shiur that we're going to have this evening is certainly going to be halakhic, but I want to start just by sharing with you a thought which is always relevant to the 15 stages of the Seder, but I think this year, under the circumstances that we're experiencing, I think it's particularly relevant. And that is some comments of the Chidushei Harim. The Chidushei Harim was the founder of the famous Gera Hasidic dynasty. And he wondered why, particularly on Seder night, do we talk about the Seder? There are lots of other festivals where we have an order of things in which we do things. That's on Rosh Hashanah, there's an order to the day. On Sukkot, there's an order today. On Purim, there's an order to the mitzvot of the day. But it's only on Pesach that we talk about the Seder. We talk specifically about the importance of the order. And the Chidushei Harim answers that it's not really so much to do with the order of things that we're going to be doing over the course of the evening and the meal, but it's equally to do with the notion that we're recognizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates Seder, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty, creates order in the world, meaning that we can sometimes look around and have a sense that everything's random and that a whole load of events are in actual fact just coincidence. In the time of the Israelites and the Egyptians, people could have been mistaken into believing that in actual fact the 10 plagues were just sort of random events that happened, and chances coincided that enabled the Israelites to leave Mitzrayim. But in actual fact, that wasn't the case. There was Seder, there was order to everything that happened, and the Almighty put everything into order in that way. And I think that's relevant always on Pesach when we think about what happened in Mitzrayim, but I think it's particularly relevant this year as we consider what's going on in the world, and we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is behind the scenes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows and understands what's happening. We have to pray to him to make sure that he guides the events in the world, to make sure that everybody is safe, as many people as possible are saved, and that he brings this terrible pandemic to a close. So that's some opening thoughts. But let's start now with Kadesh, the first of our 15 stages of the Seder, making Kiddush at the beginning of the service. Now, of course, Kiddush isn't something which is unique to Seder night. We make it every Friday night throughout the year. We make it every Yom Tov night throughout the year. There is a discussion as to whether or not the Kiddush on Yom Tov night is biblically mandated or rabbinically mandated. Everybody agrees that Kiddush on Friday night is a mitzvah from the Torah, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadosho. But there's discussion as to whether or not Kiddush on Seder night is midoraita or midrabanan. But beyond that, the Kiddush on Seder night doesn't seem to be significantly different from any other Kiddush that we have throughout the course of the year. But let's look at some pertinent comments in the Shulchan Aruch at the beginning of the halachot of the Leil HaSeder. The Shulchan Aruch tells us, Yiyeh Shulchano Aruch miba'od yom, that a person's table should be nicely laid and arranged even before Yom Tov comes in, Kidei le'achol miyad kishet techshach, so that a person's able to sit down and start their Seder as soon as it gets dark. V'avim hu b'beit HaMidrash, and even if a person is studying in the Beit Midrash, Yakum needs to get up and make sure they head home. It's a mitzvah to start Seder as early as one halachically may do so. But one shouldn't say Kiddush until it gets dark. And this is a point of distinction between Kiddush on Seder night and Kiddush throughout the year. Throughout the year, one's allowed to make Kiddush before it gets dark. And indeed, that's something that we do the whole way through the summer. We tend to bring in Shabbat at 7:15, 7:30, something like that. And in the height of the summer, we get home, it's still bright daylight. Nevertheless, we sit down and we make the Friday night Kiddush. However, on Seder night, we're not able to do that. On Seder night, we have to start Ad Shetechshach, only once it's got dark. Now, in actual fact, there is some discussion about this amongst the Rishonim, amongst the early halachic sources. That's the Talmud establishes for us that we have to eat the Matzah and the Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, after dark on Seder night. But the question is, do we have to do the other mitzvot of the night also after dark? Tosafot is of the opinion that in actual fact we don't. It's only the Matzah and the Korban Pesach and the Maror that have to be eaten after nightfall, and the reading of the Haggadah can be done before it gets dark. Other authorities, the Maharil, for example, thinks that the Haggadah also has to be read after dark, but the preliminaries can be done before it gets dark. But we follow the view of the Trumat Hadeshen and most Rishonim that in actual fact everything, including Kiddush, has to be done after nightfall, because we compare all the mitzvot of Seder night one to another, and just as the Matzah and the Korban Pesach and the Maror must be eaten at night, so likewise the Haggadah and the Kiddush must also be done at night. So that's a first distinction between Kiddush on Seder night and Kiddush on all the other festivals and Shabbaton. There is a further distinction as well. If we look further on in the Shulchan Aruch tells us, shiur hakos revi'it lachashi mazgenu, so one should have a revi'it, at least 86 milliliters of wine inside one's kos, one's cup for Kiddush, v'yishteh kulo urobo, and a person should drink either the whole kos or at least most of it. And this is another point of distinction between Kiddush on Friday night and regular Yom Tov night and Kiddush on Seder night. Usually, for Kiddush, the person making Kiddush only needs to drink a mouthful of wine. A little bit more than a sip, but certainly less than a revi'it. Just a mouthful, what we call malul lugmav. On Seder night, there's a requirement to drink at least a revi'it, or preferably, if possible, the whole kos. Why is that? It seems that the reason for this is on Seder night, there's not only a requirement of drinking the wine for Kiddush, but there's also a requirement of demonstrating cheirut. Cheirut means a sense of being free. And this is a characteristic of a person who's free. A free person is able to enjoy their wine, is able to drink a whole cupful, where a person who's in somebody else's service, a person who's always nervous about what other people are going to tell them that they've got to go and do, they'll only drink a small amount of wine. But on Seder night, we're free people, we're relaxed, we're in charge of our own agenda, whatever we're going to be doing, and therefore a sign of chayrut is that we should drink more wine than we would usually at Kiddush, and therefore it's proper on Seder night to make sure that we drink at least most of the kos of wine, and preferably one should drink the whole kos of wine. So that's some thoughts on the first of the 15 stages. After Kadesh, we move on to Urchatz. Urchatz, or washing our hands, is something which hopefully we're all very good at this stage. We've been doing that a lot over the course of the past 3 or 4 weeks. But of course, Urchatz on Seder night is done a little bit differently to the hand washing that we've been practicing during the course of this pandemic. And we're washing our hands in the ritual sense. Now, on Seder night, we wash our hands twice. Once at Urchatz, and then just before the meal for Rachtzah. The question is, why do we need to wash our hands at the beginning of the Seder service for Urchatz when we're not going to be eating any bread or matzah at this point? We understand the washing later on for Rachtzah, but why is it that we have to wash our hands at Urchatz? So it seems from the Gemara that the reason why we wash our hands for Urchatz is because of something known as davar shetibulo b'mashke. We're going to be eating something which is dipped in a liquid. And in a Truma and Tara sense, something which has been dipped into a liquid can contract ritual impurity if unwashed hands come into contact with it. And therefore, to prevent it contacting ritual impurity, the rabbis established that before davar shetibulo b'mashke, before a person eats something which is dipped in a liquid, they should wash their hands as if they were doing so for eating bread. Now, one of the interesting things is, of course, that it seems that we only do this on Seder night. Not many people seem to do this during the course of the year, even though they might have fruit or vegetables or other foods which have been dipped in a liquid. Now, the Taz, in his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he makes the observation that in actual fact, what we're doing throughout the year is not correct. The fact that on Seder night, we make the effort to wash our hands before eating the vegetable which is dipped in the salt water. This is indicating to us very clearly that those who don't wash their hands that way during the course of the whole year have got it wrong, and they really ought to do so. However, that's not a unanimous opinion, and other authorities actually maintain that at least the minhag is, the prevalent custom, and it has halachic basis, is that we don't worry about this during the course of the year. The Chok Yaakov, in his commentary, points out that we do it particularly on Seder night, so that it will be something that's different, so that the children will ask a question about it. And that's also the view of the Chaye Adam. So there are certainly good halachic authorities who give credence to the practice, all and more in the breach than the observance, that we actually don't worry so much during the year about washing our hands for davar shetibulo b'mashke. An interesting question is, at the Seder table, that who is supposed to wash their hands for Urchatz? In some families, everybody does Urchatz, because everybody's going to be eating the vegetable dipped in salt water. But in other families, that's not the case, and it's only the Baal HaSeder, the person who's leading the Seder, who washes their hands for Urchatz. And that practice is certainly evidenced in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which says, Achar kach yichotz yadav, v'lo yivarech alehen u'menagvan. After Kiddush, the Baal HaSeder washes his hands, v'chotech min ha-karpas la'atzmo l'chol b'nei veito, and then cuts the karpas for himself and to share with all members of the household as well. So now we move on to the karpas. The Shulchan Aruch tells us, Notel yadav l'tzorech tibul rishon, so we've washed our hands for Urchatz, v'lo yivarech al netilah, and we don't say a bracha al netilat yadayim. V'yikach me'akarpas pachot mikazayit, and then one takes less than a kazayit, a small amount of karpas, umetablo b'chometz, and dips it in vinegar, umevarich borei priyat hama v'ochel, and says the bracha borei priyat hama and eats it, ve'eino mevarich acharav, and doesn't say an after bracha, particularly because one's eaten less than a kazayit. So that's the minhag that I think we're most familiar with. We take a small piece of karpas and we dip it in either vinegar or salt water. But let's look in the Rambam. The Rambam has an interesting formulation in Hilchot Chametz Matzah, Perek Chet, Halacha Bet, the 8th chapter, 2nd halacha. The Rambam says as follows: Matchil u'mevarech borei priyat hama. So you say the bracha borei priyat hama, as is said before eating vegetables. V'lokeach yerek, and you take the vegetable, u'metabel oto b'charoset, and you dip it, according to the Rambam, in charoset. V'ochel kazayit, and then you eat a full kazayit. Hu v'chol ha'mesumin imo, the Baal Seder and everybody who's with him. So the Rambam has two things which are different to the widespread practice. The Rambam is of the opinion, number one, that you eat more than at least a kazayit of karpas, rather than just a small amount. And number two, that it's dipped in charoset. Why does the Rambam hold like this? So the Maggid Mishnah, in his commentary on the Rambam, makes the observation that the Rambam presumably thinks that there's a mitzvah to eat karpas on Seder night. And wherever there's a mitzvah to eat something, so then you always have to eat a kazayit. Wherever there's a mitzvah to eat a food, you eat a kazayit of that food. Seeing as there's a mitzvah to eat karpas on Seder night, the Rambam holds that you should eat a kazayit. And seeing as the Rambam holds that all the tibulin, all the dippings that one does on Seder night, they also have to be in charoset. Now the Maggid Mishnah and many other authorities take issue with the Rambam here, and they maintain that there isn't really a mitzvah to eat karpas on Seder night. We eat karpas on Seder night, but the reason why we do so is simply to create a shiur, create a hekes, so that things should be somewhat different for the people around the table, and the children will ask questions, but not because there's some intrinsic mitzvah in eating the karpas, and therefore it's not so necessary to eat a kazayit. There are, of course, different practices. I think most people don't eat a kazayit. The Rambam and the Vilna Gaon held that one should eat a kazayit. There are some people who do eat a kazayit, and certainly there is grounds to permit eating a kazayit, especially if you've got perhaps people at the Seder table. It's late already. We can't start before 8:35 this year. Perhaps you've got a lot of people around the table. By the time you've already made kiddush, it's 8:45. People are a bit hungry. They haven't eaten for several hours. So then maybe it's not a bad idea at all to eat some potatoes or whatever it is for karpas, and even if it's more than a kazayit, so that people won't get hungry and distracted during the course of the reading of the Haggadah. Let's move on now to the Yachatz, the breaking of the middle Matzah. And the practice is that we break the middle Matzah. Half of it is retained, that's under the cover, that's for the Achilat Matzah, that's when we get to the meal. And half of it is put aside for the Afikomen at the end of the meal. And in many homes, there are two minhagim which come into play here. Number one is that the matzah, saved for the Afikomen, is carefully wrapped up and put aside. And the other minhag is that at some stage during the course of the evening, when the Baal HaSeder has got his or her back turned to what's going on, the children come along and take the Afikomen and put it somewhere else. There is discussion amongst the poskim as to whether or not it's good halachic practice to encourage our children to steal, as it were. But that's not what I want to touch on this evening. I want to bring to your attention this evening comments attributed to Reb Chaim Brisker, that's Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, that's one of the scions of the Soloveitchik dynasty. And Reb Chaim Brisker pointed out that the minhag to wrap up the Afikomen and put it aside isn't just for practical purposes, but it's because we hold that the Afikomen represents the Korban Pesach, which was eaten at the end of the meal. And for the Korban Pesach, there was a prohibition of Hesech Hadat. There was a prohibition against dismissing it from your mind. You had to look after it very carefully so that it didn't get any blemish and it didn't become tameh, it didn't become ritually impure. And therefore, to mirror or reflect that, we wrap up the Afikomen and we put it aside for this purpose. So that was the view of Reb Chaim Brisker. And according to this view, Rav Moshe Sternbach points out in Shuvot V'Hanhagot that it makes sense that it's not necessarily good practice to let the children come along and steal the Afikomen, because then it's no longer under the supervision of the Baal HaSeder. And Rav Sternbach recommends that the children should at least be supervised by another adult who's present to make sure that they're being careful with the Afikomen, and that at least another adult in the household knows where it's being placed, so that this requirement of not having Hesech Hadat, not being distracted from it, is maintained. So that's the Yachatz, the breaking of the middle matzah. Let's move on to the central part of the Haggadah, as its name, Kishmo Kenhu, i.e. the Haggadah, the Maggid, the telling of the story. And it's worth noting, of course, that the mitzvah of the Maggid is Higadat levincha bayom hahu lemor, that one should tell one's children about what happened in Mitzrayim. It's the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, talking about the exodus from Egypt. And it's important during the course of the Haggadah not to get sidetracked by secondary issues, but to make sure that we're certainly communicating well to the people who are around our table, and particularly if we have children, to our children, the story of what happened when Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim. Now, a characteristic of many, many mitzvot is that before we do the mitzvah, we say a bracha. And that indeed is the case in many of the mitzvot of Seder night. Before we eat the Matzah, we'll say a bracha. Before we eat the Maror, we're going to say a bracha. We said a bracha of Kiddush at the beginning. Why is there no bracha on the mitzvah of Higadat levincha? Why is there no bracha on the mitzvah of retelling the story of the Exodus from Egypt? And this is a question which goes back to medieval times, first asked by the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, and predictably there are many, many answers to this question. I just want to share with you the answer of the Netivot in his Haggadah Maaseh Nisim, and he says as follows: So I can suggest a reason why there's no bracha on the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Because we know whenever the mitzvah itself contains a bracha, lo tiknu bracha tzavoto ha'asiyat ha'mitzvot, then we don't say a bracha on that mitzvah, because we don't say a bracha on another bracha. So the example that he goes on to give is, for example, Birkat HaMazon, benching after a meal. Benching after a meal is a mitzvah from the Torah. So why don't, before we bench, why don't we start off by saying Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot tzivanu al Birkat HaMazon or levarech al HaMazon? Why don't, and then start off Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam? Why don't we have such a bracha? So his explanation is because you never say a bracha on a bracha. So that's great. How does that help us with the Haggadah? So he points out, what's the end point of the Maggid? The end point of the Maggid is the bracha v'asher ga'alanu, the bracha, the long bracha that we say just before the second kos, at the end of the Maggid, just before we drink the second cup of wine and have the meal. We have a bracha v'asher ga'alanu. And that bracha, thanking Hashem for redeeming us from Egypt, is part of the Maggid. And therefore he says that it's not appropriate, it's not correct to say a bracha on a mitzvah which already contains within that mitzvah a bracha of its own. Now, the recitation of the Haggadah is Haggadah. Haggadah means telling a story. The Haggadah, apart from the Hallel at the end of the Maggid and the bracha v'asher ga'alanu, is a narrative rather than a prayer. And therefore, it's very important that the people around the table understand what's going on. And if we look in the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama makes an interesting observation. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us, so at the beginning of the Maggid, you lift up the Matzot and you say halach ma'anya. And then the Rama adds, V'yomru b'lashon shemevinim hanashim v'haktanim. You say the Haggadah in a language that everybody round the table will understand. Or yefarish lahem ha'inyan, or at least you need to explain every point that as you go through the Haggadah, you can't just daven through it as if it's Mizmor of Tehillim and nobody understands it. And then, very fascinatingly, the Rama says, V'chein asa ri milondri. That's the ri milondri, one of the Balei HaTosfot, laundry, of course, being here, London. He said, Kol Haggadah b'lashon Laz. He said the whole Haggadah in what was presumably Old French in those medieval times, Kadesh Avinu Hanashim V'Aktanim, so that everybody would understand what was being said. So to the best of my knowledge, this is the only shout out that London has in the Shulchan Aruch, but certainly what it's telling us is that when we say the Haggadah on Seder night, we should make sure to say it in a language which everybody understands. If the Hebrew understanding of the people at the table is poor, then read the bulk of the Maggid, or at least the key parts of the Maggid, in English. So after the Maggid, we have Rachtzah. Rachtzah, we wash our hands. And the question which is asked by a number of the Acharonim is, we've already washed our hands. It's true that earlier on we were just washing them so that we could eat the Karpas, davar shetibulo b'mashke. But do we really need to wash our hands a second time? That's when they're presumably still clean. So the Mishnah Berurah says, Afal gav shenatal lahayirakot, even though one has already washed one's hands for the vegetables earlier, keman da'amar bein time Haggadah v'halel, seeing as one has said in the meantime the Haggadah and the Hallel, that chashinan shema hesiach da'atov v'nagab b'makom metunaf shayadai maskaniote. We're worried that a person might have not been focused on what they were doing with their hands. Perhaps they scratched their head, perhaps they scratched under their shirt, or whatever it is, and therefore it's proper to wash their hands again. In the Biur Halacha, which was also written by the Chafetz Chaim, as was the Mishnah Berurah, he discusses that if a person is certain that they've been careful about what they did with their hands and they washed their hands at Urchatz, then when it comes to the second washing, they should definitely wash their hands because that's what's required. But in actual fact, they shouldn't say a bracha al netilat yadayim because their hands have already been ritually purified and they haven't become impurified in any way during the intervening period. So the Mishnah Berurah's recommendation is that if a person has done Urchatz earlier on and knows that they haven't touched anything they shouldn't have touched, that's in the meantime, then they wash their hands a second time, but they don't say the bracha al netilat yadayim. That's the Aruch HaShulchan disagrees. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, no, quite simply, Chazal said you wash your hands twice on Seder night, you wash your hands twice on Seder night, and there doesn't need to be any discussion. Let's move on now to Motzi Matzah. The bracha of HaMotzi, which is, of course, not strange to us in any way, and the bracha of Al-Achilat Matzah, which is peculiar to the Seder nights. So just with regard to the Hamotzi, it's unusual that, of course, on Seder night, we have 3 matzot on the table in front of us, instead of the usual 2 chalot or rolls or whatever it is that we have during the course of the year for Lechem Mishnah. And in actual fact, there are a number of different opinions about how many matzot one should have on the plate in front of one during the course of the Seder. The Torah gives us basically 3 different opinions. The Torah gives us one view, is that you have 2 matzot, one of which gets broken into 2. The other view is that you have 3 matzot, that's as we do. And the other is to make a distinction between Shabbat, when you would have 3 matzot, and Yom Tov, when you would only have 2. What's the main point of contention? The main point of contention is whether or not there's a requirement of lechem mishnah, whether or not there's a requirement to have 2 loaves on the table in front of you during the call for a Yom Tov meal. We know on Shabbat you have to have 2 loaves to commemorate the lechem mishnah, the double portion of man that fell in the wilderness on a Friday. But there's a point of machloket amongst the Rishonim as to whether or not that commemoration has to be followed also on Yom Tov. And some opinions maintain that on Yom Tov you don't need lechem mishnah, you don't need 2 loaves. And therefore you have 1 complete loaf, and then the second matzah is a broken matzah. Others are of the opinion that in actual fact on Seder night you do need lechem mishnah, but because the lechem for Seder night is what we call lechem oni, a poor person's bread, then even a broken matzah counts as the second matzah, or the second loaf. That's whereas others hold, as is the general minhag, is that you need 2 matzot there for lechem mishnah, and then the third one, the broken one, which is for the matzah, which is lechem oni, a poor person's bread, which is broken. That's again, there are different minhagim. Those who follow the Rambam and the Rif and the Vilna Gaon, that's have only 2 matzot in front of them on Seder night, and indeed that was also the practice of Rav Soloveitchik. That's whereas most people follow the view of the Shulchan Aruch, which is to have 3 matzot in front of you on Seder night. If we look in the Shulchan Aruch with regard to the matzah, eating the matzah, the Shulchan Aruch tells us achal kachatzi zayit, the chazar va'achal kachatzi zayit, Yachatz. Now, when one eats the matzah on Seder night, you have to eat a full kazayit of matzah. Question is, what if you ate half a kazayit of matzah and then ate another half a kazayit of matzah? Is that regarded as eating a full kazayit? So the Shulchan Aruch says, yes, of course it is, because in total you ate a kazayit of matzah. So long as you don't take too long eating it, longer than it would take to eat a pras. Now, what's a pras? A pras is an ancient measurement. It's a loaf of bread which was either the size of 3 or 4 eggs. So you need to eat a kazayit, but you need to eat the kazayit within the time frame of kadei achilat pras, the length of time it would take to eat a small loaf of bread, either the size of 3 or the size of 4 eggs. Now, we should remember that, of course, kazayit is either half an egg in volume or a third of an egg, or possibly even less than that. So when we're thinking about how much time we've got, even if we say that kazayit is half an egg, we've got time to eat the matzah, and we need to eat time which you could normally eat. That's 6 or 8 times that amount of food. So one doesn't really need to eat the matzah, extremely quickly. So long as you eat it at a normal pace, then you're going to have fulfilled the mitzvah. But perhaps a person with problems with their teeth or problems with their digestion, or they just can't eat particularly quickly, they eat very slowly. How much time have they got with which to eat this? So we have a range of different opinions. If we look in the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan tells us, it's about 3 or 4 minutes. It's interesting that he's not being exact in his calculation. And if we look in the tshuva of the Chatam Sofer, the Chatam Sofer says that the amount of time, according to some opinions, is as little as 2 minutes, and according to other opinions, is as long as 9 minutes. But certainly what I would say is that so long as you eat the matzah at a normal pace, then you're certainly going to have eaten your kazayit toch kedei achilat pras within the required time. Let's move on now to the Maror. The Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim tells us, there's a list of various vegetables that a person can use for the mitzvah of Maror on Seder night. You can't just have any bitter tasting vegetable, but it has to be one of 5 specific vegetables. So the Mishnah gives us a list of 5 vegetables, and there's some discussion amongst the early and latter authorities as to what exactly they are. But the Shulchan Aruch tells us the Ikar HaMitzvah b'chazeret, the best way to do the mitzvah is to use chazeret. And most of the Achronim explain to us that chazeret is lettuce. Now, there's subsequently some discussion as to why one can eat lettuce when lettuce doesn't taste particularly bitter. So some authorities say that it's based on a passage in the Yerushalmi, that lettuce starts off sweet, but ultimately becomes bitter. But again, there's discussion exactly how to understand that. Are we talking about as you eat it, it starts off tasting sweet, but if you eat lots of it, it starts to taste bitter? Or are we talking about the way that it's planted? When it's small lettuces, they taste sweet, but if you leave them in the ground for too long, then they become bitter. In any event, there is discussion amongst the poskim as to whether or not one has fulfilled one's obligation with lettuce that never tastes particularly bitter to you. The Chazon Ish is of the opinion that if that's the case, one shouldn't use it for maror. But in actual fact, many other authorities say, no, that lettuce is intrinsically acceptable as a vegetable for maror, and therefore, even if it doesn't taste particularly bitter to you, you can still fulfill your obligation with that. We then move on to the Korech. Korech being the Hillel's sandwich, and it's always a messy business. You take your lettuce and you put it inside your matzah, you try and make a sandwich, and you spread crumbs everywhere. Some years ago, it occurred to me, there was perhaps a different way of doing things. That's to minimize the crumbs. I decided I would take my lettuce and make an inside-out sandwich. I put the filling on the outside and the bread, as it were, the matzah, on the inside. I wrapped my matzah with the lettuce, and lo and behold, it was much easier to eat it that way. Over the years, a number of guests have expressed surprise at that manner of doing korech. If one looks in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says, "V'achar kach notel min hamatzah tachtona, gam ken kazayit maror, v'nachon l'tavlo gam ken b'charoset, u'meniach et hamaror toch hamatzah." So the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says you take the maror and you put it inside the matzah and make a sandwich that way. But if you look in the Sefer HaChinuch, I discovered, the Sefer HaChinuch, a Rishon no less, says, "V'achar she'ochlim min hamaror b'tibul," after you've eaten some of the maror, korchin mimenu al gabe matzah, you wrap it round the matzah, ba'ochlin, and you eat it that way. So in actual fact, what we find is a source in the Rishonim for eating your Hillel sandwich inside out. That's also the view of Rabbeinu Hananel. To be honest, I don't think there's any particular halachic preference, but certainly there is early backing for what I've discovered is a very practical way of doing things. Moving swiftly to the meal, and it always sort of, people are a bit rushed when they get to the meal. It's always gone on a little bit longer than intended. So we're going to try and be a little bit brief here. But one of the questions to do with the meal, and I get asked this every year, is what qualifies as roast meat that one's not allowed to eat on Seder night. The minhag of Ashkenazim, as opposed to Sfardim, but the minhag of Ashkenazim is that we don't eat roast meat or roast chicken on Seder night because the Korban Pesach was roasted, and therefore we don't want to have any confusion. We don't want people to think that we're eating or trying to eat the Korban Pesach outside the confines of the Beit HaMikdash. The Mishnah Brura says that afilu tzli kedar, even something which is roasted in the oven in a pot, that is prohibited. Now, if you take a chicken and you put it just into a pot with a lid on and put it in the oven, then you'll actually find that over the course of time, that's when you take it out at the end, there'll be lots of juice in the pan. And what's happened is you've roasted your chicken, but not in a dry way like you would with a spit, which is the way that the Korban Pesach was roasted. Nevertheless, the Mishnah Brura says this is called roasting, and therefore you're not allowed to do this for Seder night. However, the Aruch HaShulchan says, no, that tzli kedar, roasting meat or chicken in this way, would never have been an acceptable way to roast the Korban Pesach, and therefore one's permitted to eat tzli kedar on Seder night. Certainly everybody's in agreement that if you roast your chicken in a sauce, in a juice, something like that, So then it's not going to be a problem at all, and that one can do that on Seder night. We'll move on now to the Afikomen at the end of the meal. And one should be careful when one eats the Afikomen to make sure that one has room and appetite to eat it. If one's totally full, then one hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah at all. And if one's pretty full and doesn't really want to eat it, then this is certainly not a good way of eating the Afikomen. The Shulchan Aruch says that ideally, or correctly, the Afikomen should be eaten by halachic midnight. Halachic midnight, because of the clock change, is just gone 1 o'clock. And one should try and eat the Afikomen by that time, because that's the time by which the Korban Pesach had to be eaten in the times of the Beit HaMikdash. In actual fact, there's some discussion, there's a machloket in the Gemara and also amongst the Rishonim as to whether or not the Korban Pesach actually had to be eaten at least midoraita by midnight, or whether from the Torah it could be eaten until the following morning. And therefore there is actually a point of dispute as to whether or not the Afikomen has to be eaten by midnight or just has to be eaten by the following morning. Some years when you've got a lot of people around the Seder table, which isn't going to be the case this year, but some years you've got lots of people, the meal takes a long time, and you find that you're not going to be able to eat the Afikomen by midnight. What should you do? So the Avnei Nezer, in his Tshuvot, makes a famous observation. And he says what you should do is just before midnight, you should pause your meal, take a gazayat of matzah, and eat it with a t'nai, with a stipulation, saying that if the halacha is that you have to eat the Afikomen by midnight, then I'm eating the Afikomen now by midnight. But if I only have to eat it, if I have to eat it by midnight, it means that after midnight, when it's no longer time to eat the Afikomen, so then I can eat anything else. I can carry on eating food and drinking after that time. And that's so therefore, if the rule is that I have to eat the Afikomen by midnight, I'll eat it now, I'll wait till midnight comes, and then afterwards, I'll carry on eating. And then at the very end of the meal, maybe it's 1:30, 1:45, the person will eat the Afikomen a second time and say, if the mitzvah was to eat the Afikomen by midnight, well, I've done that already. And if the mitzvah is to eat the Afikomen by morning, then I'm now going to eat the Afikomen. And of course, I won't eat anything else until the morning. Next stage is Barech, which is Birkat Hamazon. Birkat Hamazon, again, is not unusual or strange for us in any way. And it's a regular Yom Tov benching. Should be noted that Rabbi Akiva Eiger was Kadesh that women, if they forget to say Ya'aleh V'yavo in benching, they actually don't have to repeat benching on Yom Tov. Whereas on Shabbat, if they forget to say Rachtzah, or if a man forgets to say Ya'aleh V'yavo in benching on Yom Tov, benching has to be repeated. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger makes the observation on Seder night, when women have an obligation to eat a gazayat of matzah, so then they've got an obligation to bench properly, and if they forget Ya'aleh V'yavo on Seder night, they should repeat the benching. Let's move on to our penultimate stage of the Haggadah, and that is, of course, the Hallel, or the second half of our Hallel. We know that one of the peculiarities of Hallel on Seder night is that even though we say a bracha after Hallel, we don't say a bracha before Hallel. But that's not, or at least wasn't always, a universal custom. Rav Kasha in his Haggadah Shlema brings 5 different views as to what the correct practice is for the bracha before and after Hallel. And the Abu Dram makes the observation that there are some authorities that hold that you say 2 brachot before Hallel. Before the first bit of Hallel, before the meal, one says a bracha likro et Hallel, which is, of course, the text of the bracha that we're familiar with from Shul, to read Hallel. And then after the meal, when one says the rest of Hallel, one says a bracha of ligmor et Hallel, to complete Hallel. But of course, that's not our practice, and we don't say a bracha at all on Hallel. The end of the Seder is Rachtzah. So Rachtzah essentially means that we're hopeful that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will look favorably on what we're doing and accept the intentions behind everything we've done through the course of the Seder. That's the Piyutim, the various songs that we sing afterwards, are certainly enjoyable Many of them, some of them at least, are very ancient. But they're actually not critical to the Seder. And sometimes, when it's very, very late, that's after the fourth cup, and we've said the bracha achrona, I turn to the guests around the table, say, you're very welcome to stay. We'd love you to be with us through Rachtzah. But if you don't want to stay for Rachtzah and you want to go home now, then that's also fine. It's an optional extra. And indeed, I do suggest to some families that they sing the songs for Rachtzah during the course of the meal. That's in case people are very tired at the very end. Let's conclude with the comments of the Shulchan Aruch, which tells us Chayav Adam Lasot B'Hilchot HaPesach U'B'Yetziat Mitzrayim. Person is obligated to carry on dealing with the halachot of Pesach and the Exodus, and to speak about all the mitzvot, which all the miracles and wonders that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has done to our forefathers, until you're basically falling asleep at your table. It's not that we've finished Seder, let's go to bed now, but there's still an opportunity to carry on discussing Yetziat Mitzrayim till sleep overtakes us. In any event, let us finish off with the words of the piyut, which comes at the end of the Haggadah, but actual fact found its original place in the Yotzrot, which were written for Shabbat Hagadol, and perhaps some people managed to say today. Chasal Sidur Pesach Hilchato. We've now gone through the halachot of the Seder, Kechol Mishpato V'Chukato, dealing with all the details, and Kasher Zachinu L'Sader Oto, just as we've spoken about the details, Kain Nizker L'Asoto, we hope that we're going to be able to fulfill them as well. I hope that everybody has a meaningful and uplifting Seder, and I wish everybody that Chag Kasher V'Sameach should have meaningful Seder on first night, meaningful Seder on second night, a wonderful Pesach, and thank you for joining us. Shavua Tov.